A ranch in the American Wild West, where winds blowing down from the Redhorn Mountains sting the skin like ice. A single Mustang had already driven 4 seasoned trainers off the property in pain. No one dared get near it. Until summer arrived, a young woman carrying old scars and a reason no one could have guessed. $1 million could save her father's life. But could she tame the soul of a wild horse? The old wooden door of the horse stable creaked in the chilly March breeze, carrying the scent of hay, dust, and that familiar trace of antiseptic. Summer Whitlow gently placed a bowl of warm water at her father's feet. Her hands moved tenderly, as if calming a frightened colt, yet her eyes bore the early creases of worry carved by time. Wade. Once the kind of man who made the entire Edge Creek region tip their hats in awe when he rode across the San Gabriel Mountains during a historic storm, was now but a frail shadow of himself, hunched in a wheelchair, his body slowly devoured by cancer. "You should get some rest," he whispered, smiling faintly. "Don't let me be the reason you forget that you're still alive too." Summer didn't reply. She simply tightened her grip on his hand, then rose quietly and stepped outside toward the stables. The golden sunset spilled through the pine trees, casting a warm hue across the dry, cracked pastureland. The Whitlow Ranch had once been a point of pride, home to 17 prize horses sought after by buyers as far as Oklahoma. But ever since her mother died, killed during a riding competition at the very arena where Summer used to train, everything had fallen apart. She no longer competed, no longer trained wild horses using the method she and her mother had pioneered together, the gentle bonding approach. That chapter of her life had been sealed away in memories, in dreams filled with hoofbeats and her mother's voice calling from beyond the fence. That evening, as Summer was tossing hay into the trough for an old gelding named Dusty, the phone in her pocket buzzed. The screen flashed with an unfamiliar number. Pusmog 406, Montana? "Hello," she answered, her voice tinged with skepticism. "Hello, is this Ms. Summer Whitlow?" A man's voice, calm and precise. "This is she. My name is Casey O'Hara. I manage Lone Rock Ranch in Redhorn Valley, Montana. We're looking for a horse trainer to take on a challenge. The reward is $1 million. Summer fell silent. It was as if a lightning bolt had struck straight through her chest. "You may have heard of Thunderjack, the wildest Mustang in the northern U.S., the man continued. "He's injured 4 trainers already. 2 of them had to be hospitalized. But our ranch owner still believes the right person can heal him." "Why me?" Summer asked, her tone edged with irritation. "I've left that world behind." "We know," the man replied, "but we also know you were the only one who ever brought back a Mustang with a traumatic brain injury and got him to race again. Lone Rock Ranch is willing to cover all travel and living expenses. We can even advance part of the reward if needed." Summer ended the call with a polite but cold thank you. She sat down on a rock behind Dusty's stall, her mind tangled like barbed wire. $1 million. Just the thought of it conjured images, her father being moved to a private hospital in Austin, having access to morphine, a proper bed, attentive doctors. "What is it, honey?" came a voice behind her of Maggie Lou, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair. Summer recounted the phone call. Maggie said nothing for a long time, then slowly sat beside her. "Some horses don't need someone to hold the reins," Maggie said gently, placing a hand on Summer's shoulder. "They just need someone who won't make the pain worse. Sometimes the thing that needs healing is us." That night, Summer didn't sleep. She sat by her father's bed, listening to his wheezy breath and staring at the splintered ceiling. Moonlight streamed through a gap in the wooden planks, falling onto an old photo frame. Her mother smiling beside a young Mustang, with 12-year-old Summer clinging tightly to her mother's hand. By morning, she packed 3 sets of clothes into a small backpack and tucked that photo into a worn leather notebook. Before boarding the bus, she hugged her father tightly and promised to be back before summer. "Where are you off to?" Wade asked, his voice shivering with cold. "I'm going to train again, Dad, a wild Mustang." "You're not going to fall off this time, are you?" "No," she smiled. "This time, I'm going to let him choose me first." The bus pulled away from Edge Creek just as the sun peeked over the mountains. In Summer's jacket pocket was a one-way ticket to Helena, Montana. And in her heart was the quiet pull of something she couldn't yet name. But one thing she knew for sure. This journey wasn't just about $1 million. It was about a promise, one never spoken aloud, to the mother she'd lost, and the fire in the eyes of a Mustang that refused to be broken. Snow blanketed the dirt road leading to Lone Rock Ranch as the pickup truck carrying Summer rolled quietly through the pine-covered hills outside Helena, Montana. The sky was as gray as ash, but not as cold as the guarded stares of the two men sharing the truck cab one. Was Briggs, the silent driver, and the other a red-haired ranch hand named Ethan. "You from Texas?" Ethan asked, spinning a rusted lighter on his knee. "Edge Creek," Summer replied with a nod. "Near San Angelo." "That's a long way out." Ethan smirked, then turned to the window. "Folks who came here to tame Thunderjack never lasted more than 3 days. One broke some ribs. Another got dragged clean across a fence." "What about the other two?" she asked. "Didn't even get a hand on him before he flung them out." Summer tightened the strap of her backpack. In her mind, replayed the description the manager had given her over the phone. Wild eyes, feral strength, and a soul untouched by man. But there was something she had never told anyone. The wilder a horse, the more rebellious, the closer she felt to it. When the truck turned the final bend, Lone Rock Ranch revealed itself nestled in a narrow valley at the base of the Redhorn Mountains. The stables were built from weathered gray pine old, but solid. At the center of the ranch yard stood a windmill creaking slowly in the wind. And beyond it, inside a steel-fenced corral, a black horse moved in circles, its mane upright, its gait like a cyclone caught in its own momentum. "That's Thunderjack," Briggs pointed. Summer stepped out of the truck, the air biting through her coat. But her chest was burning. The main office door creaked open. A tall man in his 40s stood framed in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes the color of stone, a faded leather coat clinging to his broad frame. His face was all western edges, tight-lipped, weathered, and deeply skeptical. "You Summer?" His voice was low, neither warm nor cold. "Yes, Summer Whitlow. I'm Colton Blair. I own this place, and I'm the one who put up the prize." He turned, didn't invite her in, just said, "Follow me." She stepped into a room that smelled of firewood and horsehide. The walls were lined with black and white photos Mustangs running through fog, a young woman riding near a cliff's edge, and a boy hugging a foal. On the table lay a ranch map with stall number 9 circled in red, Thunderjack. "You know what you're getting into?" Colton asked, not lifting his eyes from his coffee mug. "I know I'm not the first," Summer replied, "and I know I won't be doing what the others did." Colton looked up, gaze sharp as a blade. "This isn't therapy for horses. You've got 30 days. If Thunderjack doesn't let you touch him by then, you leave. No one's cleaning up your mess." "I don't expect them to." She met his eyes without flinching. He narrowed his gaze, then placed a key on the table. "Cabin 4, across the woodlot. You'll be using stall 7. Thunderjack stays in 9. There's a fence between." "Why me?" she asked as he stood. "Because Jesse said to give you a shot." That afternoon, Summer stood outside stall 9. Thunderjack had his back to her, but his ears angled toward her presence. She didn't go in. She sat down on the cold ground, 3 strides from the fence. No rope, no whip, no treats. Just her mother's old scarf, faintly scented with peppermint and lavender. "Hey there, Jack," she whispered. "I'm not here to make you do anything, just sitting." Thunderjack turned. His amber eyes locked onto hers, full of mistrust. He took one step forward. Then, suddenly, he broke into a gallop around the pen, his mane flaring, hooves tearing up snow. Summer didn't flinch. She stayed still. The wind tugged at her hair and caught the scarf, letting it flutter slightly. The Mustang stopped 5 meters away, staring. For a flicker of a second, his eyes softened. That night, in the small ranch kitchen, Jesse, a native man with a long braid and eyes that saw through silence, sat across from her, placing a mug of herbal tea in front of her. "You know why I told the boss to pick you?" he asked. "No, Summer replied. "But I'm guessing it wasn't for my technique." Jesse smiled gently. "Because I once saw a 16-year-old girl sit beside a Mustang with a broken leg for 8 days straight until it let her touch the wound. No one else could do that, except you." Summer gave a sad smile. "That was a long time ago. Thunderjack doesn't need someone who can beat him. He needs someone who won't walk away, even if they lose." She sipped her tea. In her mind was the wild look in Thunderjack's eyes. And in her heart, an old echo of her mother's voice, whispering, "Horses don't hear the whip, they hear your heartbeat." The next morning, she brought a chair to stall 9. She sat. No words, no movement, just steady breathing. An open presence, Cole the ranch's former trainer, with a square jaw and eyes like flint, walked by and threw her a mocking glance. "Looks like we've got number 5 on deck," he scoffed. Summer said nothing. That afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the fencing, Thunderjack stepped closer, just 3 meters now. She didn't turn her head, but from the corner of her eye, she saw his ears perk up. She breathed slow even. One step from the hornet, then it backed off. But it was a sign. Colton stood on the upper floor balcony of the main house, watching from a distance. His jaw tightened. Inside him stirred a feeling he hadn't known since his wife died. Hope laced with the terror of being hurt again. Thunderjack, the Mustang his wife had chosen as a foal, had lost control during that fateful ride. Since then, Colton hadn't touched him, hadn't gone near. He kept the horse like a relic of grief, something he couldn't throw away, but also couldn't forgive. But today, for the first time in 2 years, Thunderjack had stepped toward a human, and that human bore eyes uncannily like the woman he once loved. The night wind at Lone Rock Ranch swept down from the Red Horn Range, slipping through the gaps in the old wooden walls, making the chain links of the stalls rattle like whispered voices in the dark. Snow had started falling earlier that afternoon. A thin sheet of ice now coated the ground, turning every step into a test of balance. Yet Summer still brought her chair out to stall 9, just like every other day. She said nothing, just sat. Thunderjack stood not far from her, head turned slightly, watching. It seemed he had grown used to her presence, not invasive, not commanding, but rather like another breath in the space between trees. For the first time, Summer truly noticed his body marked with scars. One ran long along his back, faded but coarse, raised under the sheen of damp hair from falling snow. She drew in a sharp breath. That wasn't a scrape. That was a burn and electric prod scar, the kind used at force training camps. Her throat tightened, not out of pity, but out of recognition. "People think horses forget fast," Jesse had once said, "but the truth is they remember, through their skin." Summer's fingers brushed the scarf around her neck, the faint scent of peppermint still clinging after all these years. A childhood memory surfaced. Her mother, a woman from Tennessee, who once rescued a colt with a shattered leg and a fear of humans, had used music and warm water to reach him. No whip, no halter yanks, just patience, and a heart that never backed down. She exhaled slowly, then began to sing, a short melody, The Tennessee Waltz, the lullaby her mother used to hum at dusk on the front porch. The breeze carried the notes over the railing. Thunderjack froze. Ears lifted. He didn't move closer, didn't back away. He simply listened. Jessie appeared just before midnight, holding a dim lantern. "You're still out here?" he whispered. Summer nodded, dark circles under her eyes. "I don't know if I'm doing this right, Jessie," she admitted. "I don't have technique like Kendall. I don't use pressure. I just sit here and talk." "You think talking is the only way to tell stories?" Jessie placed the lantern down and pulled a small cloth pouch from his coat. "The Cherokee have a place we call the Sacred Hollow. No words are spoken there, just the breath of the earth. If you'd like, I can show you." Summer looked at him seriously. "I want to go." The next morning, after the snow had lightened, Jessie led her through a winding trail that cut deep into the pine woods. It took nearly an hour of steady climbing before they reached a moss-covered rock, behind which a narrow crevice opened into a hidden cave. Inside, the chamber widened like an open palm. The ceiling was etched with markings horses galloping through constellations. "The Cherokee elders once brought old Mustangs here," Jessie said. "Removed their reins, let them decide. Some stayed and died, some walked away, but none were ever forced." Summer sat on the cold stone floor and closed her eyes. "I don't know if I'm being brave or foolish." Jessie smiled. "You're doing what's necessary, and that's rarely the same as doing what's easy." For the next 3 nights, Summer slept outside Stall 9, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by silence and snow. No one at the ranch knew why. Cole shook his head and scoffed. Ethan said nothing, but watched her with quiet respect. Colton didn't comment. Yet from his balcony, he occasionally looked down with something close to concern. On the second night, Thunderjack approached close enough that she could hear his breathing, deep and wild, like wind funneling through a canyon. She didn't move. In her heart, one phrase repeated, "I'm not here to hurt you." On the third night, temperatures plunged. Snow fell in soft, powdery waves. Summer curled beneath her blanket, lips chapped, nose burning. But she didn't go inside. Just before dawn, something happened that changed everything. Thunderjack knelt. He lay down less than a meter away. His eyes were open, quiet. A single tear tracked down his cheek. Summer didn't cry, but her heart clenched so tightly it felt like breaking. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like someone healing a horse. She felt like the one being healed. The next morning, a small girl appeared outside the stall. Edie, 9 years old, curly-haired, backpack covered in hand-drawn stickers, sat silently beside Summer and opened her sketchbook. With each stroke of her pencil, an image formed. A quiet horse beside a girl curled beneath a blanket. "You're a great artist," Summer whispered. "I saw it in a dream," Edie replied without looking up. "He was sad, but when you came, he smiled." Summer turned to Thunderjack. The horse was watching Edie. No retreat, no tension. As the sun rose above the mountains, Edie walked to the fence and extended her hand. And then something no one expected happened. Thunderjack let her touch his muzzle. Summer's breath caught in her chest. Jessie, standing behind her, murmured, "Children don't carry fear. Horses feel that purity." Colton stepped forward, his face unreadable, but his eyes were no longer cold. He looked at Summer, at Edie, then at the horse breathing evenly by the gate. "You did something I didn't think was possible." "Not yet," Summer said, her voice trembling. "This is only the beginning." Colton said nothing. For the first time in a long while, he felt something stir inside, like the first snow melting on an old wooden rooftop after a bitter winter. That night, beneath a clear sky, Summer sat beside Jessie by the campfire. Edie had fallen asleep in her blanket, clutching her drawing of Thunderjack. "Why do you think he let Edie touch him first?" Summer asked softly. Because in her, he saw something he once had, Jesse replied. What? Trust. Summer stared into the flames. Her voice drifted like wind across the prairie. Then I'll start over, with him. Jesse nodded. And remember, sometimes the deepest scars are the ones no one can see. Dawn spread a fiery orange glow across the Red Horn Valley, casting glittering light over the fresh blanket of snow. Wind from the far-off mountains swept down, brushing through the pine fences and rustling the early winter branches. But inside Summer Whitlow, the real storm had just begun. She had barely stepped into the main paddock at Lone Rock Ranch when the buzz of camera crews, crunching boots on snow, and the loud voice of a local news reporter filled the air. There she is, the girl from Texas who's making all of Montana wonder. Can she tame Thunderjack, the million-dollar beast? Summer froze. No one had told her the press would be there today. Jesse appeared beside her, laying a steady hand on her shoulder. They got here faster than I expected. KXMT ran a teaser last night. You better brace yourself. I don't want this to turn into some kind of show, Summer muttered. It's not your choice anymore, Jesse said quietly. Once money's on the table, people will come. And they don't want silence. They want blood, sweat, and tears. From across the paddock, Colton Blair emerged in his worn leather coat, a clipboard in hand, his expression unreadable. Summer, I need a word with you. She nodded and followed him into the wooden office at the end of the stables. Inside, Colton laid 3 folders on the desk. Lone Rock Ranch has received 2 new applications for the challenge. Both are professional trainers. I couldn't say no. But you said. I said it was an open challenge. You're not the only one with a shot. Summer clenched her fists. Who? He handed her the files. One was Kendall Rowe 32, 7-time Arizona state champion, known for her pressure motion method and icy precision. She had sharp features and eyes that always seemed to be measuring, calculating. The second was Jackson Lee from Oklahoma, former mounted police. Used a technique called reflex override, meaning the more the horse resisted, the harder he pushed. You know Jackson's been accused of animal abuse, Summer said, her voice tight. I know, Colton replied, eyes steady. But rules are rules. You'll share the training arena, rotating schedules. Fair. Not fair at all, she said, hollow. Exactly. That's life. She turned away, pulse pounding. Never before had she felt so pushed to the fringe in a place where she had just begun to belong. That afternoon, she returned to the stall. Thunderjack stood with his back turned, mane bristled as if sensing something was wrong. Hey, buddy, she called softly. No reaction. She reached for the rail and spotted a burlap sack under the trough. Inside was a mix of corn feed. And something else. She lifted it to her nose. A sharp, stinging scent hit her eyes instantly. Capsaicin, said a woman's voice behind her. Just a nerve stimulant, not harmful. Summer spun around. Kendall Rowe stood there, arms folded, leather jacket zipped tight, smirking. You put this in the feed? Summer asked, voice trembling. No proof, Kendall shrugged. And you'll need more than a hillbilly lullaby to win. Summer yanked the sack from the trough and dumped it in the trash. Her eyes glistened. I'm not here to play dirty, she said. Kendall laughed, turning like royalty leaving a stage, but then a loud thud cut through the silence. Thunderjack was pawing at the fence hard with both front hooves. For the first time, Summer saw him truly unhinged. She ran to the stall, but the Mustang tossed his head, slammed into the gate, and let out a piercing cry. Jesse arrived in seconds. He's panicking, he said. Smells the chemical. He remembers. The pain. Colton rushed in. What's going on? Kendall spiked the feed, Summer shouted. I did not, Kendall snapped. Check the cameras, Jesse barked. Colton turned to Ethan, the ranch hand in charge of the security footage. A few minutes later, the evidence played out on screen. Kendall, slipping the tainted feed in when no one was looking. Colton said nothing at first. Then he fixed his stare on her. "You're out. Off the ranch in 1 hour." Kendall tried to protest, but Colton's gaze was steel. As she stormed off, he turned to Summer. "I'm sorry, I was wrong to think this could be judged by credentials alone." Summer didn't answer. She just stroked Thunderjack's back, still trembling in the corner. That night, she called Dr. Holden in Texas from the small ranch kitchen. "Doctor, how's my dad?" she asked, gripping the phone. The line went quiet. "Wade's weakening. The cancer's in the marrow now. I think it's time to prepare." Summer said nothing. In her mind, her father's voice echoed, "Don't fear what you'll lose. Fear not living enough for what remains." She hung up, stepped outside. The Montana sky was littered with stars. She looked toward Thunderjack's stall. "I won't quit," she whispered. "No matter who comes or goes, we're going all the way together." But the next morning brought more news. Colton gathered everyone in the main paddock. Jackson Lee stood beside him, whip in hand, next to a different horse one with panic in its eyes. "I reviewed Jackson's record," Colton said. "I see it clearer now." "I've got credentials, experience," Jackson said coolly. "But no compassion," Colton replied. He raised his voice. "I don't need another trainer. From this point forward, only one person will work with Thunderjack." Summer blinked. "You mean—" "You," Colton nodded. "Prove to Montana that some things can't be forced." Silence fell. Jesse placed a hand on her shoulder, eyes full of quiet faith. "From here," he said, "it gets harder, but it also gets real." Summer looked toward Thunderjack. His eyes were still wild, but no longer distant. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But at least now, she wasn't walking it alone. The early winter sun stretched golden light across the faded brown grass of Redhorn Valley, casting a soft glow like a half-remembered dream. Thunderjack, with his jet-black mane and deep, unreadable eyes, moved calmly across the training ring, no longer hostile, no longer afraid. Every step echoed the quiet journey he and Summer had taken together. It had been 3 weeks since Jackson Lee was dismissed, and Lone Rock Ranch felt different. Each morning, Jesse greeted Summer with a quiet nod of trust. Edie, the once silent little girl, now came regularly to sit by the stall, sketching Thunderjack as he stood still under falling snow. Even Colton, the iron-hearted rancher, seemed to have softened, the hard edges of his gaze slowly giving way. That morning, Summer reached out and placed a hand gently on Thunderjack's neck. For the first time, he didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He stood still, as if waiting. She placed her palm on his forehead and whispered the old tune her mother used to sing while nursing injured mustangs. "We did it, partner," she murmured. Then she picked up a halter for the first time and held it out. Thunderjack didn't resist. He let her loop it around his neck without hesitation. The silence around them deepened. Jesse, standing in the distance, clasped his hands behind his back and muttered something ancient in Cherokee. Then Summer tried something she hadn't in years. She mounted. Her heart thudded like thunder in her chest as she settled on his back, feeling the warmth of muscle beneath her. Thunderjack stepped once, then again, quietly, calmly. His hooves tapped gently against the snowy ground. No resistance, only rhythm. Colton watched from afar. He said nothing. He only turned away slowly and looked toward the mountains, where the sun had just begun to rise, setting fire to the snow-covered peaks. That afternoon, Colton invited Summer into his office. He sat in the worn leather chair and poured her a mug of mint tea. "You're the first person to ride him since he came to this ranch," he said. Summer nodded, eyes still glassy with emotion. "Do you know who Thunderjack's mother was?" She shook her head. Colton opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a blonde woman riding a stunning Mustang across a sunlit field. She was laughing. Her eyes were full of life. "That's my wife," he said quietly. "And that horse was Thunderjack's mother. They fell together during a freezing rainstorm. I survived. She didn't." Summer stared at the photo for a long time. "After the accident," Colton continued, "I brought Thunderjack in from the sanctuary. He was just a few months old. I thought I could fix what hurt by controlling it. But the more I pushed, the more he ran." "I understand," Summer whispered. Silence settled over the room. Then Colton slid a contract across the table. "Someone wants to buy Thunderjack. $1.2 million. They plan to use him for breeding, create a new line of Mustangs for commercial riding, genetically engineered to be calmer, easier to train." Summer froze. Her hands trembled. "They're waiting for my answer," Colton said. "But as his trainer, you have a right to know." She folded the paper gently. "Are you going to sell him?" Her voice cracked. Colton met her eyes. "A year ago, I would have signed without blinking. But now, I'm not so sure." That night, Summer sat alone in the stall. Thunderjack rested in the corner, his head on a bed of hay. She looked into his eyes, deep, dark, and still. "My dad needs money. A lot of it," she whispered. "I could save him if I just said yes." Thunderjack didn't move, just exhaled. "But if I take the money, they'll take you, cage you, clone you, make you something you're not." Her voice trembled. Tears welled up. "Is there a way to save my dad and still keep you free?" Edie quietly appeared, placing down a new drawing, Thunderjack, running through tall grass. No halter, no rider. "I think," the girl whispered, "he doesn't need anyone to keep him. Just a place he wants to stay." Summer pulled Edie into a hug. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt not alone. The next morning, Dr. Holden called via video from Texas. "Wade's responded well to the last treatment," he said. "But he'll still need surgery, a pelvic bone replacement. It's expensive." Summer looked out at Thunderjack grazing under pale sunlight. "I'll find a way," she said, "somehow." Colton stepped out from behind the barn. "I heard part of that." She turned to him. "I don't want to sell Thunderjack." "Neither do I," he replied. They stared at each other. Two people carrying different kinds of scars, both searching for the same answer. "So," Summer asked, "what do we do?" Colton lifted the contract and tore it in two. "We do what's right, even if it pays nothing." Later that day, Summer received her invitation for the final round, a public riding performance. Judges, sponsors, cameras, $1 million on the line. But to Summer, it no longer mattered. She ran a hand down Thunderjack's mane. "You ready?" she asked softly. The Mustang raised his head as if he understood, and in that moment Summer knew they had chosen the harder path, but also the true one. Edge Creek, Texas. The dry wind swept across the empty fields, carrying red dust that clung to the worn wooden porches like old regrets. Summer set her weathered suitcase down on the front step and pushed open the door she'd run through 1,000 times as a child. The scent of medication, peppermint tea, and a faint trace of sterile oxygen lingered in the air. Wade, Whitlow once a rodeo legend feared and admired across the Southwest, now lay motionless on a hospital bed in the living room. His face was sunken, but his eyes still lit up the moment he saw her. "My girl's come home," he rasped with a half smile, voice cracked, but still carrying that dry Texas wit. "And did you bring $1 million horse in that little suitcase?" Summer chuckled, kneeling beside his bed, taking his frail hand in hers. "No, I just brought back a very hard decision." He gave a slow nod, closing his eyes as if digging through a distant memory. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but sure. "You know, Summer, folks like to think the smart choice is the easy one. But what keeps you from regretting it later is almost always the hard one." "You think I should go back to Montana?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I think Thunderjack's not the only one who needs you," he said, eyes drifting to an old photo of her mother on the shelf. "Some souls don't need saving. They just need someone who won't give up on them." 3 days later, Summer sat on the porch, watching the crimson sunset stretch across the fields. The wind carried the soft chime of a video call from Edie. The little girl's face appeared on the screen, tired eyes brimming with worry. "Summer, he's not eating," Edie whispered. "He kicked his stall all night, keeps looking at the gate like he's waiting for someone." Summer swallowed hard. Her chest tightened, something inside her breaking loose, turning into a pull she could no longer ignore. That evening, Colton called. His voice was low, stripped of its usual steel. "If you still believe in him and in yourself, come back. My word still stands." Summer didn't need anything more. The trip back to Lone Rock Ranch took 2 days. When she stepped off the bus at Red Horn Station, the snow was falling thick. Jesse was there to meet her. He didn't say anything, just handed her a heavy coat and nodded slowly. Thunderjack's stall loomed like a dark silhouette in the storm. She stepped inside quietly. The Mustang stood in the corner, ribs more visible now, his body gaunt. She called to him gently. He flicked an ear, but turned his back. Even the strongest bonds, once broken, take time to mend. Summer laid a bed of fresh straw near the gate and sat. She didn't speak, didn't move, just breathed. The cold bit into her, but she stayed. Day 1. Thunderjack kept his distance. Day 2, he stood still, silent. Day 3, he moved. A little closer, less than 5 steps away. She didn't eat, didn't sleep, just sat. Sometimes she lifted her mother's wooden flute and played an old melody, a song that drifted like memory across the frozen air. Then, on the 3rd night, when the snow was thickest, Thunderjack came forward, step by slow step, and gently lowered his head onto her shoulder. She cried quietly, not from pain, but from the feeling of something deep inside her, finally coming home. The next morning, Jessie took her to a place she'd never seen, a hidden cave tucked behind the old pine ridge. Inside, hundreds of carved symbols lined the walls, spirits, stars, horses running through storms. "This is where my ancestors let their Mustangs go," Jessie said. "Some chose to die here, some chose to live, but none were chained." Summer placed her hand on one carving, a horse standing tall in the rain, head raised to the sky. Words wouldn't come, only a swell in her chest that felt sacred and aching all at once. "Thunderjack doesn't belong to you," Jessie said softly. "He's part of something older, like your mother, like your father, like all things that crave freedom. But you've been chosen to walk beside him." She closed her eyes and remembered the look in Thunderjack's eyes the night before, not fearful, not wild, but trusting. At sunrise, Summer and Thunderjack walked out to the training grounds together. Colton was already there, arms crossed, his face unreadable. But when Thunderjack appeared behind Summer, no rope, no pull, just quietly following. His eyes softened. "You ready?" Colton asked. "No," Summer said, "but Thunderjack is." He nodded slowly. "Then let's go forward." That afternoon, Jessie brought her a leather-bound journal. Inside were the final notes of Colton's late wife entries, written just days before the accident. One passage made Summer stop and reread. "If I don't come home one day, find someone who listens. Mustangs don't need riders. They need companions." She closed the journal and held it against her chest. Thunderjack stood down in the arena, mane tossing in the wind, eyes glowing wild and proud. But this time, that wildness belonged to her, not because she had broken him, but because she had never walked away. The morning of the final performance arrived under a sky veiled in soft gray clouds, like a silk scarf draped across the Redhorn Mountains. A quiet hush settled over Lone Rock Ranch as though the land itself was holding its breath. Flags fluttered along the railings in red, white, and blue, catching the gentle wind rolling down from the hills. A makeshift grandstand had been built on the packed dirt arena. Nearly 400 spectators filled the seats. Local journalists, representatives from major ranches, even investors flown in from the East Coast. Every pair of eyes focused on the white gate at the far end of the arena, the very same gate where countless Mustangs had once emerged, heads high, defiant before the human world. Colton Blair stood behind the fence line, coat collar turned up against the breeze, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the entrance. Beside him stood Edie, wearing a hoodie with a drawing of Thunderjack that she'd made herself. Her wide eyes were filled with a mix of nerves and wonder. "She's not using a halter?" Edie whispered. Colton didn't answer right away. He checked his watch, then looked toward the gate again. "She doesn't need one," he said at last. Thunderjack already chose. The gate opened. Summer walked out. No rope, no whip, no saddle. Just a young woman in a white shirt and worn leather jacket, arms relaxed by her side. And beside her, Thunderjack each stride like a breath drawn from history itself, his mane lifted gently in the breeze. Each hoof fall kissed the ground with a rhythm that matched the pulse of everyone watching. Summer didn't command, she didn't coax, she moved in slow arcs. She nodded, she reached, and Thunderjack responded. Effortlessly, a dance began not of dominance, but of trust. She extended her left arm, he moved alongside. She spun gently, he turned with her. She paused, closed her eyes, exhaled, and the Mustang stopped too, head lifted toward hers, gaze steady as flame. Not a sound came from the stands, no applause, no murmurs, only the wind brushing the flags, only the sound of breathers and his in-sync. Then Summer spoke, not loud, not as a statement, but as a whisper carried on the wind. "We didn't tame each other. We chose each other, didn't we?" Thunderjack bowed his head, slowly, gracefully. Then he lowered himself to his knees before her, a warrior from another time offering his loyalty to the last friend he would ever need. A gust of wind surged through the arena, lifting a spectator's hat and scattering the silence like shattered glass. Someone sobbed aloud, and all of Montana held its breath. Summer won. The $1 million prize was announced to thunderous applause. A giant check was raised by the organizers. Cameras zoomed in on her face lit by sunlight that broke just in time to catch her smile, strong and young. The host approached, microphone in hand. "How do you feel at this moment?" Summer glanced toward the fence where Colton, Jesse, and Edie stood watching. Then she turned her gaze toward the distant hill where Thunderjack now stood alone, looking out across the land, untethered. She drew a breath. "Thank you," she began, "but I can't accept the money." The crowd gasped. She went on, "I'd like to dedicate the prize to creating a Mustang Preservation Fund so horses like Thunderjack can live free, as they're meant to. And I hope Thunderjack can come home to Lone Rock Ranch not to be trained, but to live as he deserves." Colton closed his eyes. Jesse placed a quiet hand on his shoulder. Edie burst into tears and clutched Jesse's coat like she'd just seen the world change. 1 week later, as the snow on Redhorn began to thaw, Summer rode Thunderjack across the open plain. Behind her rode Colton mounted on his late wife's old mare. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every once in a while, their eyes met, carrying more than words ever could. The wind tangled Summer's hair. She didn't mind. Somewhere in that sky, she knew. her mother was smiling. Edge Creek, Texas, the following spring. Wade Whitlow sat in his wheelchair, a riding crop in hand, shouting through laughter, "Come on, Summer, you gonna let an old man outpace you like that?" She laughed until she nearly fell off her horse, riding alongside him in the wide pasture behind their home. Doctors had once said he had mere months to live, but now almost a year had passed, and he still had enough fight left to bicker over horse speed. That day would be the last time they rode together. He passed peacefully in his sleep, a smile on his face, one hand resting on the saddle as if dreaming of the fields he loved most. Lone Rock Ranch welcomed a new resident, Edie. The once shy little girl now led groups of children as the youngest guide in the Whispers to Mustangs program, founded by Summer and Jesse using the Preservation Fund. Thunderjack still lived free. Each morning he stood atop the ridge, where grass met morning light and wind brushed through stone. People said he belonged to Summer, but whenever someone asked, she'd reply, "No, I'm just the one he chose to run beside." At the entrance of Lone Rock Ranch, Jesse carved a wooden sign by hand. Underneath a drawing of Thunderjack racing through the wind, the words read, "Mustangs don't get tamed, they choose who to run with." If you believe in bonds that don't need ropes to last forever, leave a 1 in the comments to let us know you're still with us. Or simply type 0 if you've ever been moved by a look, whether from a person or a horse. Don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories and turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next unforgettable journey between human and animal. There are many more stories waiting ahead.